Ramps on the Moon. Inside Stories by Ramps on the Moon. Ramps on the Moon aims to enrich the stories we tell and the way we tell them by normalising the presence of disabled and deaf people across mainstream theatre. Inside Stories is a series of unedited snippets from conversations between people who have been involved in some way with Ramps on the Moon. The following audio is a snippet from one of these conversations. Alim Jayda and Kerry Michael.
But yeah, that energy of making you all do so much made it a pinball machine. But also the songs were bloody amazing, weren't they? Those songs lifted you up. You know, it's a rock and roll show. And people were saying, was it loud? Why was it so loud? Well, partly it was a rock and roll show, but also because of some of our deaf dancers wanted that extra
Well, I
bass,
remember
which is-
having... I think one of the one of the challenges, maybe I don't know if I want to use that word, but challenges that I had as the dance captain was having to fight fight the cause of some of the deaf dancers' expressions. So, and one thing that happened quite often was they would express that they needed to feel vibration on stage.
Yes.
And I really had to put that fight into sound to try and get them to boost the levels. And obviously, you know, find that middle ground of when A, it becomes damaging to the audience and us, but 2, when it becomes invasive, but 3, still being accessible for them. Because, and I think and there's always a solution, isn't there? And we found a wonderful solution. I think when they bought something that went on the stage and it created that much of vibration that came through the stage, that the deaf dancers, some in particular, really could feel the bass.
Yeah.
And that completely transformed the show. And I think I remember us being in Nottingham for that, and that is when it sort of went to the next level.
Completely.
Yeah.
I enjoyed having all these people hanging off my every word. It was so much power and status, and like with all these interpreters hanging off everything I was saying,
Waiting for your next breath.
and every time I swore, I would deliberately swear to watch them sign it.
Do it.
It's so adolescent, isn't it? I was being such an adolescent director.
Well, you had good interpreters in the room, because some interpreters will censor it.
Were they? What
Some,
they do?
it's very annoying.
Yeah, but you want to get the energy of
I
the room
agree.
and the people.
I agree.
Don't you?
Interpreters should interpret
Those
everything.
interpreters were wonderful, actually. They were great, weren't they?
Wonderful. And that's one thing I absolutely loved about the process, is that there was never a you and I environment. It was very much an ensemble.
Yes.
All the access workers, all the interpreters, every single person was very much involved.
Yes.
Because we had 4 in the room every day, didn't we, interpreters? And most would probably go, "Oh God, that's too much," but they were all constantly working, weren't they? Because there was always one on a break / standby, 2 always on the floor,
Yes.
and 1 normally on the creative side.
Yes.
And they were constantly moving around, weren't they? And that was an experience. And going to...
What was interesting about the process was it made me use my words slightly more carefully.
Really?
Because I would use something, sometimes I was deliberately being ambiguous with the company to not make decisions for them. But sometimes I was being ironic, and actually with the tone of how you say something, you know you're being ironic. But sometimes that doesn't translate well.
I think because I am an interpreter as well, I think one of the hardest things that I find to interpret is ambiguity.
Yes.
Because you find yourself sort of sitting in a place of no man's land where you sort of don't really know. You're trying to make sense of it yourself, so you can't relay that. So are you saying that you were conscious of that, so you had to try and make sense of it?
Sometimes I was deliberately being ambiguous.
Right.
In the process, so we don't make our choices too soon.
So how did you find that?
Well, I think
working
it's just,
with an interpreter.
Sometimes you have to kind of warn them. You have to warn interpreters, which is I'm being vague here, or I'm deliberately not making sense here, or actually I know the answer to this question, so don't answer the question for me. Just throw the question out.
Yeah.
But that's kind of just my process as a director. Sometimes you want to deliberately throw stuff out there that you know isn't correct, or you don't want to get to the conclusions too soon in the process. But the best bit about all that stuff, I thought, was working with Jenny and Daryl, our BSL
Amazing.
translators, consultants,
Yeah.
because, you know, we used to talk about when we were getting into the sort of when we used to get into the process quite intensely, we would talk about a word for a really long time, especially with some of those lyrics, those rock and roll lyrics.
But they're so abstract, some of those lyrics.
So we would have to make a decision about what exactly we mean
Yeah.
by the word star. Is it a star in the sky? Is it a superstar? Is it something that is it just a bright light?
Well, I remember one of the numbers that was one of the hardest ones to translate was come to this house.
Yes.
Because it was so repetitive.
Yes.
But also was it literal?
Yeah.
And I remember what I loved about Jenny and Daryl is that they were very open to conversation.
Yes.
I think they had to be with that sort of work, didn't they?
But they forced us and me to make choices about exactly what kind of house we were doing. Was it a real house or a metaphoric house or a palace?
Yeah.
And that just actually makes the whole, which you want to do anyway in a production, don't you? You want to actually get down to the detail and you want to have specific answers, even if the audience doesn't understand your specific answers.
Do you think the sign language and having to dissect the language on the script helped to change or move the performance to another level?
Absolutely. I suspect
Yeah,
if
I
you're doing
think it did, doesn't it?
if you're doing another musical without the BSL translation as an element, you'd skip over so many more of the lyrics because then actually you just assume everyone knew what that meant.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't be as rigorous in your understanding of it. But because there was another language in the room, which was BSL, that needed to be understood and translated, everything you spent a bit more time on every word that was on the page, which you should be doing anyway with any musical.
But it's interesting because in that process, it really forced me to really think about it. Because sometimes I feel, especially in musicals, because you don't have much time to get it up onto the stage, you just throw it together.
Yeah.
You know, music, dance,
Yes.
everything. You're throwing it all together.
Yes.
And sometimes you fall into a sort of autopilot mode. But with this, I found I really had to dissect everything I was doing. Why was I doing it? How did it affect me as a character? How did it affect the piece? How did it affect other people?
Completely.
Which is why I think it's one of the best experiences I've had today.
Oh, thank you. Was that about me, that compliment?
No, it was a show.
Oh, shit.
Produced by Hannah Quigley and Tammy Doncic for the New Wolsey Theatre and Ramps on the Moon. Directed and edited by Tammy Doncic. Supported using public funding by Arts Council England.